Proverbs chapter 30. We started last week talking about the Proverbs of Agur, and we don't know much about him at all. We don't know who he is, when he wrote. As I said, I'm pretty confident these Proverbs were written sometime between the life of Solomon and the life of Hezekiah. But other than that, we really don't know. So Proverbs chapter 30 really is, I would say, two major sections. Verses 1 through 10, and verse 10 is kind of an odd verse. It's a transitional verse, or it actually seems just kind of random, if we're really honest. But it starts off with this proverb in verse 10, and the way I understand this, the way I interpret what's happening, is the maligning a servant to his master lest he curse you. I think the cursing really becomes the hinge that sets up, or the transition that sets up the next 8 verses 11 through 17. And so we have in this, it seems at first to be rather disjointed, but I think there's quite a bit of intentional structure or outline within the last 20 verses or 22 verses of Proverbs 30. And so let me give you a quick outline. I don't think this is in your notes at all. So Proverbs 30, verses 11 to 33. Verses 11 through 17 discuss vicious children, which I'll show how all these verses are related in just a minute. Verses 18 through 20, really the key word there is way. And so we have the ways that are wonderful and the way of wickedness. And then verses 21 to 28, folly and wisdom on the earth. And then the final section is just added dealing with majesty, and I would say proper majesty. And what happens, verses 11 through 17 have this a little bit, but the rest of the chapter has really, I think, a very pronounced contrast and application. And so that as we see some of these things that are happening in here, there's giving some almost seem like cryptic statements that are then applied. And I think if we're reading this with that in mind, we see the Proverbs and then an application. Verses 18 through 20, there really is a contrast, but again, by way of application there. So I know that's kind of rough and not very clear. So I'm going to draw that out as we walk through here, walk through this. And we start off with this teaching about vicious children. These are a number of proverbs that start with, there is a generation. So this is last week's lesson. There is a generation, verse 11, that curses its father and does not bless its mother. There is a generation that is pure in its own eyes, yet is not washed from its filthiness. There is a generation, oh, how lofty are their eyes, and their eyelids are lifted up. There is a generation whose teeth are like sword, and whose fangs are like knives, to devour the poor from off the earth, and the needy from among men. And so he uses this phrase, there is a generation, several times. He's describing a group of people. That's the way he's using generation, as of a group of people. And so I don't think we can read this as Agur just saying kids these days, but rather it is a set of people, a specific group of people in that day and age who were doing this. I don't think he's saying all kids are like this, but rather just specific ones. This generation speaks ill of parents. What kind of parallelism is that in verse 11? Repeating, contrasting, developing, illustrating, building, pivoting, mirroring, cause and effect. Yeah, this is developing. Again, remember the building usually is a incomplete sentence that is then finished later in that. And so it is a developing. There is almost a sense of contrasting in this. Just by it does curse and does not bless, but it really is a developing parallelism there. And so he's describing in the course of this both a positive and a negative, or an action and an inaction. And it describes both father and mother. So the contrasting there and the comparisons are really showing the completeness of their disrespect. They actively curse and they passively fail to give the proper blessing or the proper honor that should be given. And it's not just to one parent, but to both parents, so that the entirety of their life really is in disrespect to their parents. And what is the fifth commandment? Honor your father and mother, but yes, honor your father and mother. And in direct violation of the fifth commandment by their active disrespect and their failure to give the proper honor. Then he says in verse 12, there's a generation that is pure in its own eyes, yet is not washed from its filthiness. So there is a self-righteous generation. What kind of parallelism is that? I weighed it heavily towards the contrasting, but the developing is very much there. So you can say in this one, I would think you can say either one. Interestingly, and he's talking about the same generation, by the way. He's not talking about multiple groups of people. This is a description of the same group of people. And so in verse 11, what does this generation do? It curses the father. So is this generation obeying the Ten Commandments? Absolutely not. In verse 12, what does this generation think about itself? Yeah, it thinks it is pure, it is upright, it is good and holy. It is self-deceived, and it is self-righteous. And this is the problem with self-righteousness. When we go about to create our own righteousness, we then create it based on terms of what we think are righteous, based on the things that matter to us. And so for them, they're righteous because honoring parents doesn't matter to them. Something else, whatever it is, matters more to them. And because they do that, they're hard workers. They're good with money. They're personable and friendly. Whatever it may be, they value that. And so that because if they do that, they think they're good. They think they're pure. But in fact, they are not. They are filthy. And in fact, the word filthiness it's a scatological term. It's speaking of human waste. So he's not just saying they're dirty. He is saying they are disgusting in their dirtiness. They are as filthy as you can imagine, while imagining themselves to be pure and holy. The self-righteous, related directly to that, verse 13, there's a generation, oh, how lofty are their eyes, and their eyelids are lifted up. What is it? What's that imagery of lofty eyes and eyelids lifted up? Their eyes are doing this? What? Yeah, it's pride. It's all about pride. So what kind of parallelism is this? It does have a strong repeating aspect. I think there is though the development to it. In that he is describing high eyes and then lifted up eyes. That it's the second term seems to be more of their action. So that the first one's their state, the second one's their action. The first line is their state, the second one is their action. That they are absolutely and utterly proud, completely. They are proud in all things. Their eyes are high and haughty. They think, as Jim already said, they think they are all that in a bag of chips, and you are nothing. And then we have the expression of their pride. There's a generation whose teeth are like swords and whose fangs are like knives, to devour the poor from off the earth and the needy from among men. So this one is a 4-line proverb. I've not said a whole lot about them, but there's certainly numbers of them throughout Proverbs. But even though it's got more lines, it still follows the same basic parallel structure. So what kind of parallel is in verse 14? This is an illustrating proverb. It's drawing this picture. Are their teeth really swords? No. What do they really have? Fangs as sharp as knives, or as long as knives. So they have teeth like sword. They devour the poor from off the earth. They have fangs like knife to devour the needy. So it's vampiric in its description. That's what he's depicting there. So you're intended to be thinking of these things with these vicious beasts of people. With these, if you've seen pictures of lions and the fangs in their mouth, they are huge, and they're vicious, tearing things. That really is part of what he's depicting here. Is these ones with these vicious teeth that are just biting and devouring everyone. They are bestial. They are greedy, but they're violent and destructive in their greed. And in that, they destroy the needy. So that they are, as I already said, vicious and violent in their greediness. And in the course of this description, there's really, as Michael V. Fox said, nothing is said about this generation. For the description itself is enough to condemn it. So that, he doesn't do any more than describe them. But in describing them, we recognize this is evil. And we also see, and this is part of what ties these Proverbs together with verses 15 and 16 and 17, is character is indivisible. So who they are at home, who they are in their heart, is also who they are in their relation to others. You can't say, well, he's good at home, he's righteous, he honors his parents. Yeah, I know that he's always stealing from the poor, but he's a really nice guy. Have you seen the way he treats his parents? You can't say that. Biblically, we can't say that. If there is genuinely godly character, if there's wisdom in the heart, there's going to be righteousness at home and abroad and everywhere in between. Now we get into numeric proverbs, which I'm going to talk about in just a second. But verse 15 says, the leech has 2 daughters, give and give. And in my opinion, that's a proverb. That's a whole proverb right by itself. And then the second half of verse 15 starts this collection of numeric proverbs. But there is a direct connection between the description of this generation in verses 15 and 16. So let me read both verses together. The leech has 2 daughters, give and give. There are 3 things that are never satisfied, 4 never say enough. The grave, the barren womb, the earth that is not satisfied with water, and the fire never says enough. So, what connection, or do you see any connection between verses 15 and 16 and verses 11 through 14? The greed. The greed between verse 14 and verse 15 and 16. You have the leech's 2 daughters are give and give. We all know what a leech is. This generation is so greedy, they are taking from the poor. They are not satisfied. They're never satisfied. They're demanding the poor give more to them, just like the leech says to whoever it attaches itself, give me more, give me more. Just we would say the mosquito has 2 daughters, give and give. The mosquitoes are not satisfied. They're not contented with just sucking a little bit of your blood. They're going to drain you dry if they possibly can. So that's part of what we're seeing here. This greed that between verses 14 and 15 and 16, that's part of what connects all these together. He illustrates this insatiable appetite with these 4 different things. You have 5 different things. The leech, I've already said his two daughters are give and give. You have the grave, again, is death, which I think in this way we recognize grave as just a word picture for death. He's not saying that an individual hole in the ground, but the state of death itself, the personification of death. Does the grim reaper ever come along the earth and say, okay, nobody's dying this year, I've got enough, can't handle anymore? And the barren womb, and again, culturally, he's the one who cannot have children is not satisfied. In that culture, there was an earnest, anxious longing. You think of the whole story there with Hannah, and she has no children. Her wife, the sister wife, is giving her all kinds of grief because she has no children. And her husband comes to her and says, "Am I not enough?" And she doesn't really respond. But we all read that story and say, no. She wants a child. She doesn't want another husband. She wants a child. And that's the mindset here the author of this proverb is drawing from. It's not going to be satisfied, and so that all of this is just this complete. I am not satisfied. Whether it be the leech, the grave is never going to be full. The barren womb is not going to be satisfied as long as it is barren. The drought-stricken land is not satisfied. It's going to keep sucking up the water and keep demanding more. The fire burning, you keep throwing wood on it, it's going to just burn more and more and more and more. It's utterly insatiable. And then we see verse 17. He says, "The eye that mocks his father and scorns obedience to his mother, the ravens of the valley will pick it out, and the young eagles will eat it." So verse 17 is really how we know for certain that verses 11 through 17 are really one unit. What's the connection between verse 17 and verse 11? There's two specific ones. Okay, yeah, you have the disrespect, the mockery of parents. You have both those things. Both parents mentioned, father and mother, and the disrespect, the dishonor towards that child, towards those parents, by that child. And so that they act as bookends to this section, making it one solid unit. The connection between verses 14 and 15 just confirms that. And so we see then, what kind of, verse 17, what kind of parallelism is the first two lines? It's another 4-line proverb. What kind of parallelism is the first two lines? Yeah, this would be developing again. So we have mockery of father that then is scorning obedience. It's intensifying the mockery of scorning obedience to his mother. What about the second two lines? The last two lines? Yeah, it's the same thing. You have the ravens of the valley picking it out, and then intensified by both a greater bird and greater consequences. It's not just plucked out, it is eaten. So all 4 lines together, what kind of proverb do they make? Yeah, so now we would have a cause and effect. The mockery and scorning of obedience leads to this death. That's what it's describing. It's death, and it's an uncared for, unloved death. The child is just this mocking child is just lying somewhere in the wilderness. He is roadkill. The scavengers are picking out his eyeballs and eating them. It's obviously very, very vivid in its depiction. And so this generation that is greedy and proud, that is destructive to those outside, its primary characteristic is that it dishonors its father and mother. And so that Agur makes those really the critical issue. And then these other things are symptoms of that. The other things are related to it, but their great failure is their failure of honor to their parents. And so the application of this is honor your father and mother. And whatever age we are, there's still that honor and respect to father and mother. we also see the application that dishonor of parents will be punished. It is noteworthy that Ephesians, we are told, honor your father and mother, because this is the first commandment with promise. The promise in the Old Testament was honoring your father and mother, your days will be long on this earth. There's a direct connection between the right treatment of your parents and consequences in your life, a shorter lifespan. And again, in the terms of Proverbs, we're not speaking absolutely in every case, but I think we are dealing with a general principle that we recognize, and we are wise to warn others. There is consequences of dishonoring your parents, of disrespecting them, of calling them names, of mocking them, of abusing them in any way. Those things will be punished. Agur has these numeric proverbs where he says, yes, there are three things, yes, there are four things. And what it does is it offers a category for really thinking about these things, and the numeric really uses it's for emphasis. And part of the way it's phrased and laid out, it wants us to understand somewhat the significance of this list. And in some respects, and I think particularly in Proverbs 30, the last item on the list is one the fourth item is one that we should look at and we should think about and see, is there greater significance here? And so this numbered list is just in fact, he says there are three, yes, four, is more of an emphatic, it's a rhetorical device to stress the emphasis of listen to what I'm about to say. And he's talking about now these things which he doesn't understand. Things which are wonderful things, too wonderful to understand. It is the way of an eagle in the air, an eagle's flight. The way of a serpent on a rock. The way of a ship in the midst of the sea. And the way of a man with a virgin. So what kind of a parallelism is in verse 19? It is building. He is, in this one, he is talking, he's moving from the farthest away to most significant, or most intimate, or most immediate. An eagle's flight, you look up in the air, you see an eagle flying. And of course, nowadays we know about thermals and talk about aerodynamics and the eagle's feathers and all of that. And if you really want to understand an eagle's flight, you can start working it out and start figuring it out. And yet it's a marvelous thing to see this eagle. I know I enjoy it when we get the strong winds coming off the lake, and we see every once in a while on US 2, you'll see the wind blowing up from the south, and the eagle's just playing. You see them just kind of dive into the wind and go racing in, and then they go swooping back out and just back and forth, playing in the wind. And it's an astonishing thing to think about. I mean, there's 20, 30 mile an hour wind, and they're out there just playing. They're having a good time. And yet at the same time, they're way up there. Probably outside of a zoo, none of us have been particularly close to an eagle. Then he says the serpents crawl. They're right here. We might stomp on them every once in a while, or kick them up in the leaves and the dry branches and stuff. But how does it crawl? Well, but I mean, what's the mechanism? And it's an astonishing mechanism, the way that God has designed the muscles along its stomach to move, and the way the scales are oriented to actually give it friction to push it forward. But again, it's something we can understand, we can study, and others have studied and observed and worked out how this happened, and it's still an astonishing thing. And to see them move so quickly at times, when they're just flexing their stomach muscles, and off they go. And then a ship's path in the midst of the sea. That is, as far as it goes from a human perspective, that is much more significant, because that ship is bringing in trade goods, or that ship is taking away my trade goods. That ship is a part of what is necessary for our living. But how does it move? We know the wind blows and sails catch it. What about there are currents in the sea that the ships will follow? And they'll get in and they'll take them along in different places for at least a little while. And it's an astonishing thing. Again, even though we know the mechanisms, and the psalmist or the author of Proverbs would have understood somewhat the mechanisms of moving with the wind and the rudder and all that was happening, it's still an amazing thing. And then he says a marriage's consummation, the way of a man with a virgin. And I think in the language he's using, it is specifically that, the consummation of the marriage and the marvel of that joining of man and wife. And what he is saying, he's pointing to and saying, these are the things which are astonishing to me. These are things which are marvelous to consider. And even though we may understand portions of it, the full grandeur and glory of it, we don't really comprehend. And he has, verse 19, he has the way, the way, the way, the way. All four, it's the same word. And then verse 20, this is the way of an adulterous woman. There's a direct connection between verses 19 and 20. And it is an associated warning. I don't like the word parenthetical, even though I put it in. It's an associated warning. It's directly connected to this. Is the adulteress here, and now she eats and wipes her mouth. And of course, he's not talking about her sitting down at a table. It is a euphemism for her immorality. She practices her immorality, and when she is done, she says, I've done nothing wrong. That's it. I've done nothing wrong. And he is describing her way in contrast to the wonderful way of these other four things. And part of what the comparison here shows us is the adulteress defies the created order. The man and his wife is a wonderful thing. It is a good thing from God. The adulteress has committed wickedness. She has violated that good thing that God gave. She treats sex as consumption, just like a meal. You sit down and it's just something to be consumed, rather than really what God intended, rather than for the enjoyment of the relationship and the intimacy of the relationship. She's defying the created order of a man and his wife, and defying the purpose of the sexual intimacy between a man and his wife. And the adulteress defies the marriage relationship. She debases it, treats it as nothing, as unimportant, and she in the end denies her sin. So we have these four ways which are marvelous, and then we have this other way which is deceived, destructive, disordered. So the application is really simple. Don't walk in the way of the adulteress. We saw this, Proverbs chapter 5, Proverbs chapter 6, Proverbs chapter 9. He's already exhorted Solomon has exhorted us to take heed of this warning. Agur here at the end of the book of Proverbs gives the same warning. This is the way of folly. Then we have verses 21 through 23. He has things for which the earth is perturbed. Yes, for four, it cannot bear up. He says, for a servant when he reigns, a fool when he is filled with food, a hateful woman when she is married, and a maidservant who succeeds her mistress. And so we have four different kinds of people that he's talking about, and they're inappropriate placements. So it is improper for a slave to be a king, for this slave to rule there. And I'm not going to get too much into all the ins and outs of this one. There's some things that we're thinking through, but it's improper for this one who is truly deserving of slavery, of his servitude, to be suddenly made king. He is going to act like a fool. A fed fool is inappropriate. The fed fool, he's going to be content and happy. He has everything he needs. And it is wrong. It is improper. A married shrew, this hateful, bitter woman. That's what he's describing as this woman who the continual contentions that are like the dripping of the rain. This is the one where you need a nice, comfortable room in the corner of the housetop because you don't want to be in the house with her. It is an improper, troubling thing, troubling to the earth, all of these. And then a debauched maidservant. And that seems to be the idea, not just that a maidservant, her mistress dies and she marries the husband, the widower, but it seems as if this is a maidservant who engages in immorality with her master, so that she takes the place inappropriately of her mistress. And so he says these things are improper. And by way of application, I'd say two quick things. Wrong behavior is destructive, and the wrong person in the wrong place brings trouble. And it's part of what these Proverbs teach us, is that if someone who should not be in that position, should not be in that position. They do not have the character or the wisdom that is necessary for it. They shouldn't be there. It's going to bring trouble. And there is now, in contrast, the insightful, the wise. Verse 24, there are 4 things which are little on earth, but they are exceedingly wise. Now, verses 21 through 24 are a unit, or verses 21 through 28, are a unit. There's a contrast between these two different groups. What is it in verse 21 and verse 24 that is the same? Yeah, exactly. These are both things on the earth. The first set are things which perturb the earth, and then there's these little things on the earth, but are incredibly wise. And so we have improper people in the improper place in the first set, and now we have proper creatures in their proper place, acting properly as they ought to act. And so we have the wisdom here, the ant. Verse 25, the ants are a people not strong, yet they prepare their food in the summer. The ants plan ahead. They act wisely in the summer months. If you remember Aesop's fable, it's the grasshoppers who act foolishly, sit around playing their guitar while the ants are bringing in all the harvest. And when winter comes, the ants are comfortable and the grasshopper is cold and starving. Anybody remember that fable? So this what Solomon or the Agur is saying here, is that they are wise in planning ahead. Then the rock badgers we call them hyraxes too. Is the name of it. The King James, I think, uses the word conies. They're really not rabbits, but it's I would say almost a groundhog type thing. But these hyraxes, they have secure homes. They build their homes in the rocks. They make their homes in the crags. So they're not very big. They're not much bigger than a rabbit. They don't have a lot of strength. They don't have claws and fangs to defend themselves. So what they do is they wisely build their homes where they ought to. Up in rocky places, up in the mountainsides, up in places where you can't get in and you can't traverse easily. They have these secure homes. The locusts have no king, yet they all advance in ranks. And so what he's pointing out here is an orderliness to their actions. So the way the locust swarms would come in is you'd have one come in and land, and then another swarm or another wave would come in over top of them and land in front of them, and they would almost leapfrog one another. So it seems like they're advancing in waves, exactly as a military maneuver would do, that they come in these various waves to take a position. And that's what these locusts do. They don't have a king that's in the background saying, now this unit, now you go. This division, now you're over here. But they just simply move in a very orderly, relatively orderly fashion. Despite their destructiveness, despite even the seeming chaos that they cause, if you watch their movement, it is very orderly. And then the spider skillfully grasps with its hands, and it is in kings' palaces. Some translations have the word lizard here. Either way, the principle is the same. They infiltrate palaces, able to get in because they can, as it says here, skillfully grasp with its hands. We've seen this. Spiders are a really good example. They're coming out, at least they're becoming more active in our house right now, and it seems like it doesn't matter what you do, there's always going to be spiders somewhere. You're not going to get rid of them. And you take the palace of the king, the majestic palace. He has servants who are entrusted with cleaning it. It's been made out of ivory and gold and all kinds of cedars and beautiful things. And there's a spider web up in the corner, way up there where nobody else can get. But there's a spider. Because of its skill, it's able to take hold and build its web wherever it wants. It's acting wisely and skillfully. So the application of this is in part, don't be like the first four. The ants, the hyraxes, the locusts, the spiders, they all take the proper actions, take the proper course for what they are and what they need. And so here, I'll just take the third one. The hateful woman, if you're married, don't be hateful. That'd be part of it. If you're hateful, don't get married. That's that really would be part of the wisdom here of acting appropriately. In our case, don't elect a fool to be president. And maybe another more pertinent application, if you know someone is being foolish, you know that they're acting foolishly with their goods, don't give them everything that they're wanting. Because there are times they call up and say, I need this. And you know they've acted foolishly. You know they've wasted what they had. Wisdom says, no, I'm not going to just make sure that you're comfortable in your folly. And here we see as well, if an animal acts wisely, so can a person. Really, you think about it. People do say it, I can't do that. That's not me. If a dumb animal does not bear the image of God, has no eternal soul, has no Holy Spirit residing within it to teach it and instruct it, if this animal can act wisely, so can we. Learn from the wisdom of God's creatures. It's absolutely valid to say, I see this. They're taking these wise steps. I can learn from that. And of course, we recognize not everything just transfers over. We don't live in hives. So we may honor and marvel at the work ethic of a bee. But we don't live in hives. We don't live in little communes with a whole bunch of others just all crammed together. We reckon, there are principles that we take and we transfer them through scriptures to understand, what do we apply to our lives and what do we not? I'm not really sure that we should go around and all, make a living just off of scraps of sugar that may fall to the ground. None of us are going to live very long on that. The ants do perfectly fine. And yet we can take the wisdom of diligence, of planning ahead, of orderliness, of skillfulness, to learn from those things and to imitate them. And so with that, plan ahead. That's a very definite one. And that's one reason that Agur points these out to us, is teaches us this wisdom. Plan ahead. Take proper precautions. It's appropriate to have a lock on your door. It's appropriate to say, I think we're about to have a really big storm coming through. I need to go close the basement windows. Some of those obvious things. It's appropriate to say, I'm in a really bad section of town and I'm alone. I'm going to lock my doors and I'm not stopping the car until I get back to the interstate and up a couple more exits. That wisdom that says, I know what situation I'm in and I'm going to respond properly. Act in an orderly fashion. Again, the locust and in all of their confusion can move forward in an orderly way. We can work in an orderly fashion. And then I've already said this one, work skillfully. Learn the skill to do what needs to be done. And then the last several verses here, verse 29 to 33, we find the impressive walk that leads into the final warning. And what we're talking about here in verses 30 and 31 is that which is rightfully impressive. It says there are three things which are majestic in pace. Yes, four which are stately in walk. So these are things when you see them, there is an immediate impressiveness about them. There is an inherent majesty. So a lion, which is mighty among the beasts, this powerful lion, not the cowardly lion, but a brave lion. The one that is powerful in its walking and in its position. It does not turn away from any. You take one of these huge male lions and they try to take down an elephant sometimes. And there can be incredibly impressive creatures. A greyhound. So you take a powerfully built, fast-moving dog. And did greyhounds exist in ancient Israel in Solomon's day? Certainly not as we think about them. And so don't think of this as the highly bred greyhounds that we have today, but it is some sort of I would say strong, maybe fast, but impressive dog that you see, and it just has this incredible look. And Agur is not talking about this at all, but I think of a big Saint Bernard. Maybe a big, friendly, happy dog, but you see it coming, and it's a big, impressive-looking dog. You see a Rottweiler come, especially a big, stocky one, and there's an impressiveness to it that it said, man, that's an awesome animal. A male goat, a ram. You see a ram among the flock. You see him among all the ewes, and you get the big alpha ram, the mature ram with the horns on his head, and he is a powerful animal that rightly rules the yard. And then a king with his army, a king whose troops are with him, a king who is surrounded by thousands of his powerful warriors. So when he tells somebody to do something and they say, well, you and what army? He can say, me and this army. That kind of king that has all the power he needs, he is going to walk with a majesty. And all of these things that we would say there's an appropriateness about this. But then verse 32 and 33, he contrasts it. And in this final warning, he's shown this is inappropriateness. If you have been foolish in exalting yourself, if you are a king with thousands of men, you can walk as if you're a king with 1,000 men. If you were a slave with nothing, you probably shouldn't parade around as if you're a king with everything. That's what he's talking about. If you've been foolish in exalting yourself, or if you have devised evil, now we're moving this up. We're building on this, and it's not just an undeserved pomp, but now actually it is scheming to take away from that which is majestic. So I think in the context, I think he's probably pointing directly to somebody who's scheming against the king. And so that if you have been devising evil, he said, put your hand on your mouth, stop. Don't say anything, stop whatever you're scheming, just quit. And so if you put on airs, and if you scheme, stop it. I mean, it's that simple. Stop it. Don't do it. And then verse 33, he says, for as the churning of milk produces butter, and wringing the nose produces blood, so the forcing of wrath produces strife. So what kind of proverb is this? It's a 3-line proverb, but it's not pivoting. So what kind of proverb is this? Yeah, it's illustrating there. He's using these images here in this case, and not so much figures of speech, but these images. Churning of milk produces butter. And it's really interesting. This is one of those cases where being the Hebrew is really fascinating, because he uses the same word for churning, wringing, and forcing. It's the exact same word. And then he says, so the churning of milk produces. It's the same word in all three lines. The churning, wringing, forcing produces. And then it says, of course, churning of milk produces butter. That's the picture. You had to take milk and you're going to get this. The wringing of the nose. So if you twist somebody's nose, you churn their nose, hit them repeatedly in the nose, it produces blood. The really interesting thing with the last two lines is this word for nose is the same word for wrath. So in Hebrew, nose is also wrath. It's the exact same word. So the second two lines are almost identical. The only difference is the last word. And that's how we know, whether he's talking about a nose or anger here. So the wringing the nose produces blood. So you churn milk, you're going to get butter. You punch somebody in the nose, you're going to get blood. If you stir up anger, what are you going to get? Strife. So that now this scheming and this foolish self-exaltation is going to bring conflict. So don't do it. It's going to bring conflict and it will bring punishment. I don't think that last line's in your notes either. I think that's one I just added. It will bring punishment. That's part of the strife, is the king with his troops is going to come down on you. It's going to be an immediate conflict that is going to end badly for you. And so Agur in his Proverbs, really very vivid pictures. He draws from so many just things right around us, so many things in creation, so many familiar scenes. He writes in a very different way than Solomon does. And Jim doesn't like it as well as he likes Solomon, but he writes in a very different way. But in these Proverbs, he shows us really the right way to live. He gives us another way of thinking about how do we live. And of course, we live in wisdom. We live as God created us to live. We live in obedience to his commands. And in that wise living, we look around and we learn lessons from nature. We rightly think about the created order to teach us how we can live better.